Okay, guys, welcome to Sports Matters TV and a big special for big Jack Charlton. It's iconic what we've seen the last few days. When we've seen poor Jack passed away, we've seen tributes all across the world, across Ireland. There was I suppose a great sadness, and obviously a lot of people celebrating the happiness and the good times he brought. I know Jack is probably responsible for the Celtic Tiger in Ireland. A lot of people say that he brought some great success. Probably Ireland's most successful manager as well. Statistic, I suppose when you look at stats and stuff, it always proves that. I'm joined by a good friend and a fellow presenter with Sports Matters, Stephen. Steve would know all about Jack. He's a huge football fan. Steve also had a good football career in his day. He's a bit of a dark horse when it comes to football, but he's been out in the States playing, and of course his knowledge is incredible. Steve, how's things with you, my friend? All well?
Yeah, very good now. Not too bad at all.
That's good. No, we've obviously seen Big Jack was laid to rest yesterday. And I think that the beautiful thing about it was even the media, were really kind with their words. You know what I mean? The tributes were incredible across Dublin, across Leeds, across the UK. We'll have to go right back to the start, Steve. Can you remember your first memory of Big Jack?
For me, like I would have been quite well. I would have been about 6 years old when he was kind of made the Irish manager.
Yeah.
But I suppose the first memories I'd have of Jack would be Euro '88. Not so much in the qualifiers of it. The England game obviously would have been a big one because I was home. I was in Ireland for the England game when Ireland won that one, and I actually then went to Holland for the rest of Euro '88. So I remember being in my Oma's house, my dad's mother house, watching Ireland versus Russia.
Yeah.
There, and I can remember my dad's mother, who would be Dutch. She was all kitted out in an Ireland hat and everything for that game. And I can remember that, and I have special memories about Euro '88 and that, being in Holland for it and everything else, but also just my grandmother cheering on Ireland in that game against Russia, and that's one of the best games Ireland ever played. It was amazing.
Definitely, and like statistically, obviously Jack had a marvelous career as a footballer. Obviously playing with Leeds, all his career. Obviously winning the World Cup in 1966 with England. Like managerial career, like a lot of people actually don't remember this, but he actually managed Newcastle United. He was the caretaker of Middlesbrough. Obviously, he spent a bit of time at Sheffield Wednesday as well. I think he actually had 2 spells at Middlesbrough, but statistically, like, you know what I mean? I was looking at it the other day, and like I think he managed Ireland for 93 games. They won 46, drew 30, and only lost 17. So that's a win percentage of almost 50%. That's an incredible stat alone.
It is for international football, but like you said, Jack was a great career when you think he played for one club, which is unheard of these days. Back then, I suppose it was more common. But he played over 760 times for Leeds, which is a phenomenal amount of professional games to have. I mean, the experience he had was unbelievable. And he for a centre-back, he scored a lot. He scored 95 goals for Leeds, almost got to 100 goals for Leeds United. But as a manager, he was no nonsense. There were stories of him, obviously, in his time when he would have been a football manager, of him watching, like, training and that, especially when he was like at Middlesbrough, Newcastle, and Sheffield Wednesday. And I can't remember which club it was at the time, but there was a story of they were doing practice crosses and that, and the defenders were heading the ball away. And Jack was there hidden under his hood or whatever, smoking a cigar or whatever he was smoking. And he'd had enough of seeing the defenders head the ball away. So Jack said he'd stand in as a centre-back, and they put in a few crosses. And Jack, unbelievable header of the ball. Every time he put his head in it, it seemed to go over the halfway line. So he was like, that's how you head the ball. And so I suppose people remember him as a manager in Ireland and that as well. But he had such experience, and that's what he brought to the job in Ireland more than anything else.
Definitely.
A lot of experience as a professional footballer for a long, long time.
Definitely. And they always say, obviously, Jack was no nonsense. He said it, the way it was. But like, I found myself in the last week or two, like, obviously being back to work and stuff, I'm asking a lot of people, because you always hear the stories of Jack Charlton coming to Cork. He was always in Ireland. And I always ask people, did you meet Jack Charlton? I know Billy Clark, professional footballer, had a nice picture up where I think they met him in Blackpool. But every time you speak to someone that's met Jack Charlton, there's always a great story. It's not just a brief meet. It's Jack will take his time to speak to you. Like,
he did, and he had time for everybody. It didn't matter who you were. You know, you'd run into Jack at Cork Airport all the time, which I suppose why they have the statue there. He was often flying in and out of Cork Airport to do a bit of fishing down in West Cork, or to go up the country, or to head wherever he might down here in this part of the country. He might fly into Cork for that. But yeah, I mean, if you went up to talk to Jack in the airport, he was just so approachable, Jack, and he'd talk to you about anything. It wouldn't necessarily have to be about football; it could be about anything. Jack would always take time to talk to everyone. He was great to any kids that came up to him. He was always up for taking photographs, for signing autographs, you know, and he was just such a nice, humble, down-to-earth guy. You wouldn't, I think, anyone, even I think professional footballers that played under Jack, that he managed and even people who would have known him after, and if he stopped managing him, was still doing talks and speeches, you'd never know Jack had won the World Cup because he never talked about it. Whereas some players who've won the World Cup probably never shut up about it.
No, he was old school nonsense. And like, we have to speak of the boom days. Obviously, Jack brought us a lot of success. Now, what I find incredible, obviously, there's a lot of history between England and Ireland. Like, you know, a lot of politics and stuff. But as you said, Jack is like an adopted Irish man. You know what I mean? The Irish fans adore him. You know what I mean? They don't have a bad word to say about him. He was there for 10 years. Obviously, brought us huge success. What I remember personally was the 1994 World Cup. Like, you know, I remember actually being in the UK. I was living, it's funny that you were out in Holland for a bit. I remember being in London, and obviously there was a lot of Irish bars in London. Now, I just remember, like, all the green and, you know what I mean, the atmosphere, being a 6-year-old, you know, a big chat, you know, the put them under pressure songs. What kind of memories do you have from the World Cup '94? Obviously that was, you know, an epic time.
Yeah, it was kind of a strange one. I mean, I figured that Ireland would do well against Italy in the first game, because I just thought we had a better midfield than them in Italy, where at the time Italy were known as notoriously slow starting in tournaments. They'd always kind of kick on a bit, as they did, and they obviously reached the final. But that win was something special, I can remember. And again, because of the time difference, it was quite a late kickoff, but it wasn't that late. I can remember winning, when Ireland won that game, all the neighbours kind of coming into our house, and there was just a big party inside the house. At the time, and it was fantastic. It was fantastic to watch, and obviously a lot of people went over to it, and America was still kind of, people go to America now all the time. I suppose flights got cheaper and holidays got cheaper, but at the time still going to America would have been a huge deal for people, so it was kind of great to do that. And you can think of, like, there was so many celebrities that went out there, and it was just like a home match in New York, which was, you know, there's such a big Italian population in New York.
Of course.
It was kind of strange that there was such a huge Irish crowd there. And it was a fantastic night that night. And obviously things didn't go as well against the Mexicans in the heat in Orlando, which was, you know, a bit unfair. And the draw against Norway, which wasn't an easy thing to do, because that Norway team had come through a group that had England and Holland. England didn't qualify for that World Cup. Norway qualified from the group that England were in. England and Holland qualified from that. And I suppose the Dutch game, Ireland were a little bit unlucky in some respects in that game. You had Packy Bonner's error near the end, when there was still time to go. Ireland were putting on a bit of pressure. Paul McGrath scored a goal that was disallowed for a high boot that I don't think would be given even these days with VAR and everything, as it would have counted as a goal, and it would have been 2-1 then, and who knows what would have happened in the last few minutes. But
definitely. No, we've seen a lot of players that Jack brought into the squad. You know what I mean? Like, we're perhaps looking still at, perhaps, you know, the greatest Irish squad that we've had to this day. But talking to, like, to Paul McGrath, Packy Bonner, you know what I mean, like Ray Houghton, Aldo. For you, what player stood up most under Jack Charlton?
I suppose you'd look at the defenders that Jack had, and he always, like, if you think at the centre backs when he's coming in, you had, like, Paul McGrath was coming through at the time when Jack was there. We already had, like, Mick McCarthy coming in, and no-nonsense centre-back, Kevin Moran, who was a great centre-back, Mark Lawrenson, who plays centre-back. So you had 4 top-class centre-backs. So Jack used to love, in a system, playing. Paul McGrath played in midfield a lot in the early days under Jack, because he liked having that centre-back, that defender playing in midfield who could kind of shield the back four a bit. And Lawrenson did it for a while, and then Paul McGrath would do it for a while. I suppose the centre-backs are the ones you would think of kind of under Jack. And Packy was like, I don't think there's been a goalkeeper like as legendary as Packy Bonner in a long time in an Irish jersey. Yeah. As good as Shea Given was when he came in and whatever, Packy was just a different class. Everybody knew Packy. But I suppose that for me, I suppose playing as a defender myself, but the defenders were definitely, Mick McCarthy, who was just absolutely no nonsense at the back. But Paul McGrath was just amazing to watch. He really was.
Definitely. And we always hear about the stories. Obviously, Jack's philosophy, you know what I mean? Like he wasn't really too strict on the players. Obviously, there was 10 players outside Paul McGrath's room on a Monday night, but he obviously let them go wild and let them had a point or two. Obviously, like there's stories of the players drinking with the fans in '94. Obviously, not overdoing it, but do you think that was the right approach?
I mean, if it was today, no, probably not. But then it seemed to relax, the players a little bit, and they enjoyed playing for it. And I suppose it brought them together as a team, and they had a lot of fun. I mean, you had, especially in USA '94, where you had the younger players coming through, where you had Jason McAteer, and you had Gary Kelly, and you had Phil Babb, and you had those guys were starting to come through, and some of the older players were starting to kind of phase out a little bit. Yeah. I suppose it helped kind of bond the team together a bit. Obviously, Paul was the exception. He didn't like when Paul would go off drinking, so he would. There's this famous story of Paul disappearing before an Ireland game, where he just, like Jack, what Jack would like to do with Paul is he'd have someone collect him at the airport and bring him to the hotel, and like you said, put him in the hotel room and keep Paul there inside in his hotel room. But whatever happened, Paul slipped through the net at the airport this time anyway, and never made it to the team hotel. And everyone was wondering where Paul McGrath was, and a day or two later, Jack apparently got a phone call from Paul saying, I'm in Israel, Jack. Is there anything to get back? And Jack said no problem, as Jack often did, and they brought Paul back from Israel, and he played in the game in the midweek there. But apparently he just decided to come down to Cork. Paul McGrath went in, had a few drinks with someone, they went to the airport, hopped on a flight and ended up in Israel. So
yeah, I think I heard that was the first flight out of Cork to Tel Aviv or somewhere, but apparently over to Larry Tompkins' bar or something, and then him and some Cork fella went to the airport at 5 a.m. and ended up in Israel. But it just goes to show the great memories, and like even the tributes have been pouring. Paul McGrath's tribute was quite touching. There was a picture of the old kit man. Obviously he watched the funeral yesterday. But like his legacy, Steve, is just incredible. Like it's, like I say, it's only a matter of time before we see perhaps a couple of more statues put up around the country.
Yeah, and it's like you said earlier, it was a weird one for an Englishman to come into Mount Ireland at the time, because I remember even on TV, you're talking about a time when the Troubles probably weren't at the height they were in the 70s.
Yeah.
But you still had, Jerry Adams was still being dubbed over on the news. You weren't allowed to have his voice on TV. There was anti-terrorism ads playing on RTE all the time, and you had this guy who was an English man, but also had played for England, had won the World Cup with England.
Yeah.
And he'd come in and he just won people over with just how, I suppose, down to earth he was, but also with the results he got out of the players. And like when he first came in Ireland, went off to play a tournament in Iceland, a small tournament, 3-team kind of tournament.
Yeah.
And they'd won that, and it wasn't a big tournament, it wasn't anything, but it was the first thing the Irish national team had ever won. And people bought into him straight away then after that. They could see what he was doing, and I suppose not everybody was on board with what he was doing, because Ireland had some great football players at the time, and he just didn't really want them to play football, but that was his plan. And he figured, and probably correctly at the time, if we tried to play football with some of these European teams, and you're talking a time when there was far less European teams than there are now, we'd have been played off the park by some of them if we tried to play football with them. It just wasn't our strength. Our strength was in, how solid we were at the back. And okay, we did have some people who could play football, but you have to play to what your strengths are. And, the way he would just go about, and the famous put him under pressure, which, people talk about, Guardiola and this, high pressing, and that's a big thing now. I mean, Jack Charlton started all that. And nobody did that before. Jack used to do that at international football. Okay, Ireland didn't play the sweet passing movements that they do now, playing out from the back and that. There was none of that. But in terms of off the ball, what teams are doing now in the modern game, that's what Jack set his Irish team out to do. Give people absolutely no time on the ball whatsoever to, defend from the front. Everybody was a defender on that team, and that was something that just wasn't done at the time.
Yeah, like as you said, the stats are there. He's on paper he's Ireland's most successful manager. Obviously, Mick McCarthy's always up there as well. Mick paid a massive tribute to Jack. Obviously, they had a great relationship. Obviously, Mick went into management. We've been lucky enough to sit down and chat to Mick. It's just fair to say his legacy and do you reckon obviously Jack is responsible for the Celtic Tiger? It's a joke that goes around, but obviously he brought the boom to Ireland.
Well, I remember Italia 90 and how poor people were. There was genuine poverty in Ireland and in Italia 90. And I don't talk poverty like you'd have in the third world, but people weren't working. There was a lot of people on the dole. The country was kind of grey and there was kind of nothing happening. But those games, where Ireland, and I mean that was a tough group Ireland were in.
Yeah.
You had the defending European champions in Holland. You had an English team that probably should have won that World Cup.
Yeah.
Egypt, which I know we people give out about Egypt trying a little, but that Egyptian team was built on a solid defence. Like Holland drew with them in that group, and England struggled to beat them, but did beat them in the end. So you think of those results, and the Egypt game was a bit of a letdown. And in a way, that's credit to Jack too, because in those days you felt Ireland were going to win every game they played. But the way people used to celebrate, and especially after the Romania game when we won in the second round and we were going on to the quarterfinal, the amount of people who were just like happy and smiling and going out partying and celebrating and cars driving and beeping and Irish flags everywhere. It was just unbelievable to see. And when you see them coming home, even the videos from them coming home after Italia 90, and there's hundreds of thousands of people, it was like the Pope visiting Ireland, the amount of people that were out, and that would have been unheard of like 5-6 years before Jack ever took over, because there was a big interest in Irish football, but it wasn't, you had people with Italia 90 especially who weren't football fans, who were still like glued to the TV and who were caught up in this like sense of what it was like to be Irish and this Irishness. Whereas before that, it was like you had your soccer fans who would support the Irish team and would follow the Irish team. But I mean, you had people who probably never kicked the ball in their life or watched the game on TV or anything that were suddenly following the Irish team in Italia 90. And it was, Italia 90 was, great memories for me as well. And like in terms of the Celtic Tiger, it definitely lifted the nation, and in a way maybe, it was following on from that the Celtic Tiger started to kick on, because there was a great sense of pride in being Irish again from Italia 90, I think.
Definitely. And it's always, as I say, you always hear them stories. Every bar that Jack went into, he never put his hand in his pocket. He was chauffeured around the country, points in every bar possible. Obviously, that story with the Pope is fantastic, where Jack fell asleep and he woke up and he thought the Pope was waving to him.
Yeah, I suppose it was a crazy story, Jack, because it would have been long and a hot day, whatever. Yeah, what a time to wake up and think the Pope is talking to you. But
definitely.
And those were wonderful times in Italia 90, and then before that. And like you said, the tributes to him are something special. And like I said, even talking as we have to Mick McCarthy in the past, and Mick always talks very fondly about Jack whenever you talk to Mick. And Mick is another good one for just sitting down and chatting to anyone. He's good, and I think he learned a lot of that from Jack. I think if you look at Mick and the way he handles himself and the way he talks and everything, you see a lot of Jack in that. And I think Mick learned a lot of how to treat people and how to deal with people from Jack. And Mick would say, as he would, the players had such a love for Jack Charlton. They would literally run through a wall for him if they could. And you look at how upset John Aldridge was that Jack had passed away, where he saw him as like, another father figure to him. The players really, really, really love Jack, and you don't get that too often with a manager where, you have, especially with an international manager, where you have such love from the players that played under him, because Jack was fiercely loyal to a lot of those players as well. And, they had their ups and downs and they had their fights and whatever, but but Jack was always good to them, and he always treated people fairly. I think is what most of his players or his ex-players would tell you.
The best way to be. Steve, if I had to ask you, obviously there's so many great memories, but what one stands out for you? Would it be the World Cup 90, World Cup 94? Obviously there were two iconic times for us, but what would stand out to you the most as Jack's defining moment?
I think Italia 90 was definitely one, because it was just, like I said, that the whole country had built up to it. That we qualified for our first ever World Cup. Ireland never been in a World Cup before. The fact that it was in Italy, it was kind of accessible for Irish people to go to. The fact that we were playing England again, which was a big thing, that we were playing Holland again. And nobody really expected us to do much in that tournament, I don't think, realistically. But again, just the way that Jack had built up, we'd beaten Spain in the qualifiers to get to the World Cup, which just didn't happen in those days either. But we got through, we got into the World Cup, and we had a very, very tough group. And you had the chaos, the madness of the last 15 minutes in the Holland game, when they knew England had beaten Egypt, so that both Ireland and Holland would go through if the score stayed 1-1. So they kind of stopped playing football there for about 10 minutes.
Happy days. Thank you, lads.
But they really did. They just played out a draw between them. It was almost like an unspoken word between the two teams, which was strange to watch. And then the weird drawing of lots, because Holland and Ireland were identical points and goal difference and everything. So the weird draw that had to be done to decide who'd finished second and who'd finished third in the group. And Ireland obviously finished second, which meant we played Romania. Had we been drawn differently, we'd have had Germany in the second round. Yeah. And it was literally just the drawing of the lots that put us through to play against Romania. And it was a good Romanian team as well. I mean, it was when Hadji was kind of starting to come into his prime. Ireland probably should have won that day. They were very unlucky. And the penalty shootout is just, it has to be one of the most iconic Irish sporting moments of all time, because you have players stepping up to take penalties that I remember watching it in my parents' house. My dad was away at work at the time. He works at sea, so he was away at sea. But me and my mum were there, and we were watching the match. And my brother would have been very young at the time. Yeah. But I remember my mum couldn't watch the penalty shootout. She had to go stand out the back. It was just, the nerves were getting too much for her. And I had to tell her what was going on through the window every time a penalty was taken. But I remember the likes of, some of the penalty takers that day, like Cascarino nearly took half the pitch with him when he kicked the ball, like not how it went in.
Yeah.
And then to have David O'Leary, and I met David a couple of months before the World Cup over at Arsenal's training ground, and talked a little bit about the World Cup and about his training for the World Cup and all that coming up. And David was really, at the time, he was brought back in by Jack, but he was never one of Jack's favourite defenders. Again with Kevin Moran and Paul McGrath and Mick McCarthy and those, it was, as great a player as David was, he was just the kind of odd man out when it came to Jack.
Yeah.
So, and he'd obviously been left out of the Euro '88 squad, which was kind of tough for David to take. So for David O'Leary then to be the one stepping up, and I don't think David has ever taken a penalty before or since. But, David O'Leary still lives off that moment as well. So, for Jack to have that, and I think Jack was as shocked as anyone when he saw David coming forward to take a penalty. Because as far as I remember, Jack just asked, who wants to take one, and there wasn't many volunteers at the time to take a penalty. So, I think everyone was kind of surprised when David came forward, and it's the iconic moment in the Roddy Doyle book, in the film, of course, as well, the van, when they're watching the penalty shootout in the pub and O'Leary stepping forward, and they're talking, he takes them all the time for Arsenal, and the other guy he's never taken a penalty in his life. And that was kind of the feeling throughout the country, is like, oh my God, why is David O'Leary taking this penalty? But, thankfully it worked out well, and I'll never forget Jerry Payton running onto the pitch with his number 22 grey goalkeeper top, in celebration. The team spirit that must have been there at the time was just unbelievable. So yeah, Italia 90 was great memories, and very unlucky, against Italy. A bad mistake that Ireland just didn't make under Jack that led to the goal. A ridiculous pass that was attempted that never should have been attempted, that gave the ball away, and it led to the goal. And Ireland just it frightened Italy that day. I mean, that was probably the toughest game Italy had in that tournament. They ended up losing on penalties to Argentina in the semi-final, but Italy destroyed Argentina in that game. How they lost that game, I still don't know.
Yeah, well, it's fair to say Jack brought a nation together. Obviously, an FA Cup winner, World Cup winner. He had us all behind him. A great fisherman, a great granddad, a great father. A great man in general. Just before we go, Steve, obviously you've seen Jack Charlton in the flesh. As a child, did you get starstruck? Obviously, just seeing him pass, or in a bar, or passing in the airport. Was it surreal just to see the man?
It was kind of surreal, especially when you're younger, because Jack was big. Jack was a big man. He was tall. I know we call him Big Jack, but he's called Big Jack for a reason. He wasn't a small man. His nickname at Leeds was the Giraffe because of his big long neck that he had. He was well able to head the ball. I suppose you would be, but Jack would put you at ease so quickly. He was just, I suppose, like people in the northeast of England are anyway, in general, people from, that part of the world, they're very down to earth, they're very working class. And Jack never lost that, he's always been just, kind of the local lad from Newcastle, who just happened to be a footballer, and so while people might be starstruck, when they might meet Jack, he put you at ease so quickly because of just how normal he was and how down to earth he was. And he'd always have a word with you about whatever you wanted to talk to Jack about. He was happy to chat with anyone who was willing to talk to him. So amazing. Sad in some ways, I suppose, that he died before he could see Leeds get promoted again. But who knows? Maybe he had a hand in that. You wouldn't know. With some of the other crazy results that went on, with West Brom and then Brentford give Leeds the championship. So yeah, he's an absolute legend. How he wasn't Sir Jack Charlton is still beyond me. But when you have a guy that was given, honorary Irish citizenship, which isn't given to a lot of people, it's a massive honor for someone to get. And obviously he was an OBE as well. But how he wasn't, Sir Jack Charlton is still beyond me, because he played every game of that '66 World Cup. He was their no-nonsense defender, whereas you had Bobby Moore, who would like to play out from the back, and George Jack used to yell at Bobby an awful lot, like, "What the hell are you doing?" And Bobby would try and take on the centre forward and go around him and play a pass into midfield, whereas Jack would just be launching the ball up the field as far away from the goal as he could get it. So it still baffles me that he was never knighted, but that's a story for another day, I suppose.
Definitely. Listen, Steve, it's an absolute honour as always, my friend. If I ever need to talk to someone football related, it's always you. It's fair to say we both have great memories of Big Jack. Obviously, I never got to meet him, which is obviously I'm good at it. Not that I can recall something, but I don't think it was Jack. I obviously remember being in the airport a long time ago, and flying in from England, and someone said Jack was on one of the planes. But that was the closest I came to seeing him. But an incredible man. He set an incredible legacy, and obviously great times for all of us. Guys, we will have the video up on the Facebook page and the YouTube page ASAP. Steve, it's an honour as always, my friend.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, too. Good to see you.
Definitely, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Absolutely.